What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend. You leave the old, itchy, worn-out way and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Faith Undone. This is our 50th podcast. It's hard to believe it's 50 now. We've done so much deconstruction and reframing, and I've made so many friends. It's been such a beautiful journey to do this with you. And so we are going to be doing, obviously, iTunes. We're going to continue doing the iTunes, but we're also going to have this YouTube video up now of the podcast. So subscribe to both and join me. Now you get to see kind of how what it looks like when we're podcasting, and just a little more interesting. So today is our 50th. It's been beautiful, and I hope that you've enjoyed sending in questions, dialoguing together. Please continue that. Now, this week, I actually had a couple of you. There were three, triplets of you. I don't know. So there's three, and you've asked the question from Michigan, Nebraska, and Washington. And I don't know why all of a sudden this is the question this past week that just kind of came out, but I'm gonna answer it because you asked, all right, Tony, what do you do with the book of Daniel? And I know that's probably like what most people are asking these days, right? What do I do with the book of Daniel? Don't worry about like mortgage or how to handle my kids. It's Daniel, right? But I get it, because probably you folks that asked the question, you came from the same tribe I did. And that tribe was very interested in something we call prophecy. Now, let me remind you, I did some podcasts over Revelation, and I kind of deconstructed that. So I'm going to go about that in a very similar way right now, but I'm just going to keep it fairly short, just to one podcast, unless there are other questions that come up. But basically, Daniel, we as a Christian church, as denominations, we've called that a prophetic book. And so prophecy to many people, the tribe I left, it's always been this idea that prophecy predicts like geopolitical future events, right? But for the Hebrew people who actually wrote this book, prophecy actually meant messages of hope and challenge to a present day people, those people at that point in time. They had no idea that you and I would pick up these writings. I hope you get that. So these were not actually meant for us. They were meant for a present people going through captivity. Yeah? Really good. So here we go. The book of Daniel. And I'm going to find that this is really interesting, looking at the book of Daniel. So the book of Daniel is a really interesting book when you understand the context and the meaning. So let me just summarize it, because some of you are thinking right now, like, book of Daniel, I don't even know what that book is. So here's the book of Daniel in a nutshell. So Daniel, what happens with Daniel is you get this story of a bunch of Israeli people who have just had their home taken, and they're brought into captivity. They're in Babylon. They've lost everything. And so what most empires would do is they would take these young men and they would train them. And so these young men would essentially lose their identity as Hebrews or Egyptians or whoever it was that empire took. And so these three young men come into the picture, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in the story, we have basically they choose not to bow down to the king. Again, it's a very real question that those people during that time era would have been asking. How do we hold on to our beliefs? How do we stay Jewish, right? And so the story goes that these men chose not to bow down. And of course, they're thrown into the fire, because I guess that's what you do to people who don't behave. And so you throw them into the fire, and they're in the fire. And all of a sudden, the story says that there was another being there that looked like a son of the gods. Got it? And so the king lets the men out, and where did this other being go? Well, we're not told that in the story, but basically the idea is that Israel's God will stand with you in the captivity, in the fire, in the brokenness, and there will be new life. And then of course you have Daniel, and the story goes Daniel's thrown into a lion's den, right? And Daniel, he's supposed to be experiencing death, but what happens is he's resurrected out of the ground on that. There's a couple days that passes, should be reminding you. There's a night that passes, and he comes up out of the ground, and he's alive. There's a resurrection. Do you guys see it? And so the story for the Hebrew people was that even though we're in our captivity, in our brokenness, there's going to be new life if we hold true to who we are as Hebrews. Now, so that's the first section of the story. But there is another section. And so there's this other section. And in this section, you have the dream sequence. And it's very similar to what you find in the story of Joseph. Joseph's, the king there has these dreams, and Joseph, of course, interprets it. So Daniel, following this tradition of dream interpreting, he has the opportunity to share with Nebuchadnezzar, look, here's what your dream means. And so the dream, he goes to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, look, your dream, basically you saw the statue, and there was the head of gold, and many of us, we know this, there's the head of gold, there's the chest of silver, midsection of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet that's kind of like a mixture. And so he says, you saw this dream, and then you saw this rock that's, cut away from this mountain, and it hurls itself into the statue. The statue is, completely destroyed. And so the idea is it covers the statue. It is in place now where the statue was. And so Daniel says, do you want me to interpret this? And of course the king says yes. And so Daniel says, look, here's the deal. You're, of course, the head. You're the gold. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, yeah, of course I'm the gold. And then he begins to say, here's another empire that's going to come after you, though. Your empire will not last forever, which obviously is kind of hard for any empire to swallow, right? You can't be number one forever. And so after that, there's going to be another kingdom, then another kingdom, then another kingdom. That's how this goes. Until there is this new kingdom, this new rock that essentially destroys all the others and stands in its place. Now, for many people in their culture and their tribe, what they've done with the story is they've essentially said this is prophetic. This is about a future date that's going to happen. And so they've kind of found this in between the past and the present. They've said, see, Daniel obviously wrote this book, and so this is happening in Babylon, and so he's predicting the future. Then you're going to have the Medes and the Persians, then you're going to have the Greeks, then you're going to have the Romans, then you're going to have all these other barbarian empires that begin to come into play. That's how this goes. It was basically a prediction of what's going to happen in the future. And then many people would say, well, see, when Jesus comes again the second time, he's going to be the rock and it's going to destroy the whole world, and he's going to take everybody up to heaven. That's what many people have tried to interpret this as. But here's where the whole thing falls apart. What you have to understand is, again, this is a story that's not pointing toward the future. This was never, for the Hebrews, a book that was placed within the ideas of prophecy. It would have been right along with some of the minor prophets or major prophets, but it wasn't. This book was actually, for the Jews, part of the tradition that they call the writings. This was a part of the tradition that fit with poetry and stories and metaphor. Come on! So you get it. So this story was not pointing forward, because you don't see that. That's not how they wrote. They were pointing backwards. See, this book was not actually written in Babylonian captivity. What we know is, in Babylonian captivity, that's when they compile and write Torah. They were looking back. And so when you get to Daniel, this is a book that most scholars today, any responsible ones, they say it was written from around 300 to 165 BC. So, understand this. This was written not during the Babylonian captivity. This was written not during the Mede and the Persian captivity for the Israelites. This was written toward the end of the Greek Empire. This is when, again, Rome is beginning to be a force in the world. There's the Greek people. They're seeing the writing on the wall, and so for Greece, they understand their time's limited, and so Rome is already beginning to appear, and there's all these other empires. And so the question that these people are asking, the question these Jewish people are asking, is not what predictions do we need to make about the future. They're saying this: how do we survive right here, right now? And that's the point. And so they write the stories. They combine the metaphor. They put together the things that brought hope. And so they have this story about some individuals who keep the Jewish culture kosher. They choose to, instead of fighting, they basically say, we're going to rely on God. And God is going to pull us out of captivity into freedom. And so God will stand with us in the fire. That's the idea that they're sharing. That's actually a message that would bring them hope. And so you kind of see this teased out. And then again, you get the idea. Daniel in the lion's den. We understand that out of death, while we're inside the pit, right, in the ground, there's going to be a resurrection. And we will be, again, we'll be prosperous again. We'll be seated in high authority. That's what the Hebrew people are looking for. And that's the reason this whole story is told. They're looking back, not forward. Now, when you get this, that makes all the difference in the world. When you can begin understanding they're looking back, every time you see the writing, they're looking back. Paul was looking back. The gospel writers are looking back. Everything is looking back. It makes all the difference in how you read this. And so back to Daniel. There's other stuff I think is important to understand too. We understand, again, the purpose was not geopolitical predictions to 2018. Not at all. Not the point. But secondly, again, this book fits with the writings, not the prophets. Again, important piece. And then thirdly, this rock metaphor. Again, I was told over and over again, the rock is the second coming of Jesus where he comes down again and destroys everything. That's the rock. But I want you to consider this just for a moment. The kingdom that replaces these other kingdoms, they were looking for a kingdom, a new reality. They were looking for a age to come, right? These are all phrases that they would use. And so they're looking for this kind of kingdom where they would experience freedom again. And so they're waiting for that. And so what takes place is when you have Jesus show up on the scene, this radical rabbi will shift everything. He'll say, the age to come, the freedom that you're looking for, it's actually here and now. This kingdom come, it replaces the kingdom that is present. And that is, again, a huge shift for these people. So all of you who are trying to, you're waiting for the rock to come, you're waiting for this Daniel prediction to unfold, it's already taken place. If you believe the teachings of Jesus, that the kingdom come reality can be experienced right here and right now. Jewish people, you can be free in your captivity. You can live kingdom reality even when you are in the worst of pain and brokenness. In captivity, you can experience freedom. And that's, again, the ideas of Jeremiah. You'll take your swords and you'll move them into plows, right? Into farming equipment. That's the idea. Beautiful. And so you move through this book of Daniel and begin to understand this is a very different book than it's been kind of interpreted in the past. And so, lastly, one important thing I think is good to know is the Jewish people. They were looking for a certain figure to usher in this new reality, because in the past they had all these different figures that would come into play. And so, if you're a Jewish person, you're looking back and you're remembering like Moses. You're remembering different leaders like Abraham. You're looking at Isaac. You're looking at Jacob, who is Israel, right? You're looking at Joshua, Joseph. And again, if you understand how to read the Bible, you'll see each one of these characters is Israel miniaturized. And so they're looking for someone who is anointed, but also Messiah. And there's an interesting difference if you're a Jewish person. I know there's a lot of detail here, but hear me on this one. You can be an anointed leader. And this word anointed, this word Moshiach, it's used over 100 times in the Hebrew Bible. Over 100 different times. And it always refers to someone who's been anointed, someone that is in a leadership position. And so you'll find like Leviticus 4:3, it's a reference to the priest, or Isaiah 6:1 it's a prophet, or even like the temple altar. You could find that in Exodus 40. Even unleavened bread was considered anointed. So you have this word anointed over and over again. Even the Cyrus, the king of the Persians, he's called anointed. Even Saul is considered anointed. But not everybody brings in the new reality, this new kingdom. Not everyone is the rock, right? The one that helps replace the kingdom come. And so what you have is you have different characters that show up, different people, and they're there to bring in the kingdom come, thy will be done reality. And so you have people like Joshua, right? Joshua, the actual name Jesus was called. His name was not Jesus. That's a Roman word. That's a Roman name. Yeshua, Joshua. And so you have Joshua who leads his people out of the water, right? Through the Jordan and into the new reality, into the promised land. You have different figures that show up. And so this figure of Daniel was not only anointed, but a messianic figure. And so during the time of Jesus, this book Daniel is the most popular book being read, because they were looking for a figure like Daniel. They were looking for a Messiah figure, a Moses, a David, a Daniel. They were looking for that kind of person to bring in the new reality. And so keep in mind, in Greece, you have some different figures. You have Antiochus, right? Epiphanes. And this guy, again, during that time era, and most people will say, anywhere from 300 to 165, but you have this individual who basically comes into power, and he does this, and anyone that's read this story, you'll get it. He does some really dirty things, some really messed up things to the Hebrews. If you were caught with Torah, punishable by death. And he goes into the temple, and he actually he sacrifices a pig. Now for us, we're like, big deal, a pig. So there's some bacon. But for them, the pig was like this sinful picture, this sinful animal, and you don't touch the pig. The pig is death. And so what this individual does, he goes in and he sacrifices it there. And they call this, again, get this, the abomination of desecration. And that's actually in the book of Daniel, because the Hebrew people, are experiencing that now. And they're referring to what's taking place now. And so in the middle of all of this, they're waiting for a Daniel figure who's going to help them step away from this. And what you'll see is the Jews actually revolt. The Maccabean revolt. They revolt for a time, but they're crushed again. And the Romans come in, they conquer. But please, all of this has one message. And it's the message over and over and over again. And the simple message that we oftentimes miss because we're trying to make this book something it isn't, is the message is, when you are in the middle of captivity, when you are in the middle of death and pain and brokenness, when you're saying like, this is not fair. Where's God when the marginalized and the oppressed are being hurt? Where is he? And the message for the Hebrew people was that our God is right there in the fire with us. And the message is, we will experience death, yes, but we will have a resurrection. And that's why the story of Jesus fits so well for the people who were reading Daniel during that time period. So when you read Daniel, please understand, this is not prediction. It's actually a message of hope and a message of warning. Warning, don't get too used to living in captivity. don't assimilate too well. And then the hopeful message is there is life just around the corner. So I hope that I helped kind of reframe this book, Daniel. It's actually a really beautiful book. When you remove all the crazy graphs and the timelines, I would say take those timelines, throw them in the fiery furnace. That's where they belong. Let them experience the fiery grave. That's where they belong. And allow this new understanding of Daniel to really become something you can apply today. Daniel, this book that reminds us, even in our brokenness, even in our pain, there is new life just around the corner. Hold on. Beautiful? I think so. Anyways, join me again next week as we continue deconstructing and reframing what it means to be a person of faith that still holds on to some of their gray matter. Take care, everyone, and I will see you next week. And as always, please go to my website, tonywerfel.com, or become a patron. Go to www.patreon.com/TonyWerfel. And again, if you're interested in this book that I'm writing and getting a chapter a month where you can kind of play with the ideas with me, please join in, give some donation there, and we're going to continue this awesome dialogue. Blessings, everyone. We'll talk to you later. Bye.